such as Maggie Berry would have painted.
That's not a point of order. That's not a point of order. I'm calling David Clendon.
Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to join with my Green colleague and indeed Labour and New Zealand First colleagues to take a brief call to speak in opposition to this very ill-conceived piece of legislation. It's not unusual for the Greens to oppose government legislation, but occasionally I think it's incumbent on us just to retain some perspective, to ask the question, what is this government good at? They must have some talents, some abilities. One can pose the question and get quite a long silence while one waits for an answer. But it has to be said, and it's been proven a number of times just in the last few days, this government has an absolute talent for creating large legislative sledgehammers for cracking very small nuts. It's a skill they seem to portray at every opportunity. It's indicative to me of the fact that they've never quite got their heads around the old saying that goes something like, for every complex problem, there is a simple, clear answer, and it is always wrong. This bill represents a very simple, clear, one could even say simplistic, clear approach to an issue that does need to be dealt with, and it is patently wrong approach. Sir, it's clear that perhaps this fondness, and again we've seen it characterise a number of the pieces of legislation that have gone through just in the last few days, this fondness for meddling round the margins, for trying to tweak and meddle, represents a lack of vision, a lack of a strategy, a lack of an overall standing, that the world's quite a complex place and there are many reasons for people's behaviours, and simple punitive measures are seldom going to present a workable and a viable solution to that. So there's many reasons, no doubt, why individuals fail to meet their obligations to repay loans. And yes, loans are loans, and there's an obligation on people who take them to pay them back in time. But simply criminalising them, criminalising New Zealand citizens, some of our best and brightest, is hardly a creative approach. It does reflect a lack of imagination, a lack of ability to think through a problem and to come up with a positive solution that can actually resolve the problem. It's unlikely even to be an effective solution. One could forgive the lack of, shall we say, sensibility, but it's very unlikely to be an effective solution. Again, creating this great big legislative hammer which will not solve any problems that it's targeted at. The amount of money in default attributed to overseas former students, we are told at the end of March 31st, was around 427 million. That is not an insignificant amount of money, but again, put it in the context of $13 billion of accumulated loans over the years since this loan scheme was put in place. The perverse thing is that $13 billion actually sits on the government's balance sheet as an asset. We've loaded $13 billion worth of debt onto some of our youngest and not so young, some of our best and brightest, and that appears on the books as an asset. And that's a very peculiar form of economics in my view. Sir, it would seem to me that the Minister has not really read very closely the regulatory impact statement, because had he done so, I suspect this bill would never have seen the light of day. There are some really interesting points in it that it seems the government has not really taken into account. And one of those is the provision of the bill that raises the repayment obligation of borrowers with loan balances greater than $45,000. And I'd like to quote from the RIS. It says the impact of this policy, the raising of the obligation at that $45,000 level, the impact of this policy on the compliance of overseas-based borrowers is uncertain. There's absolutely no guarantee it'll have any positive effect. Indeed, the RAS goes on to say there's a risk that some previously compliant borrowers with balances greater than $45,000 will simply stop repaying or repay less than their obligation because of the higher repayment. It's creating a very perverse incentive. It's making it easier for people to make that decision to go into default rather than continue to be compliant with their loans. Sir, I won't have time to work through all that's wrong with this bill, but I would like, as others have, to reflect on the position that it puts the police in. The police who will become debt collectors for the tax department. I enjoy critiquing this bill in future. I look forward to critiquing this bill in future readings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Called James. The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to make a personal explanation.
Leave is sought to make a personal point of order.
But the area is always indicated before.
Correcting an answer.
Correcting an answer. Leave is sought to correct an answer to oral questions today. The Honourable Bill English. Leave is sought